Tyra Owens adjusted the strap of her thrift store bag as she entered the trendy downtown coffee shop. Her casual outfit, a wrinkled hoodie and scuffed sneakers, was a far cry from the designer wardrobe she typically wore. She had always been curious about how people treated her without the buffer of wealth and fame, and today was the perfect day to test it. The cafe buzzed with activity. The scent of espresso mingled with the chatter of patrons, most of whom paid her no attention. Tyra stepped into line, eyeing the menu with faux indecision. Behind the counter, the barista offered her a quick, practiced smile before returning to the customer ahead of her. "Excuse me, ma'am, can you step aside?" Tyra turned to see a uniformed police officer glaring at her. His name tag read, "Grits," and his face wore an expression of poorly veiled contempt. "I'm just in line," Tyra said, keeping her tone calm. Grits sneered. "You've been loitering outside for hours. Don't think I didn't see you." Tyra blinked, caught between confusion and amusement. "Loitering? I just got here. Don't lie to me," he snapped. "We don't need any troublemakers around here." The room went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as heads turned toward the unfolding confrontation. Tyra caught the wide-eyed glance of the barista, who looked like she wanted to intervene but didn't dare. "I'm here to buy coffee, just like everyone else," Tyra said, her voice still steady but laced with firmness. "That's enough," Grits barked. Before she could react, he grabbed her arm and yanked her out of the line, his grip rough and unyielding. Tyra stumbled, her bag slipping from her shoulder as she was unceremoniously shoved toward the door. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Someone muttered, "What the hell is he doing?" Tyra steadied herself, brushing invisible dust off her hoodie as she regained her composure. "This is going to be interesting," she murmured under her breath, a spark of mischief lighting her eyes. Unbeknownst to Grits, a man sitting near the window had captured the entire scene on his phone. He was young, sharp-looking, and clearly enjoying the drama. As Grits stepped back inside the cafe, muttering something about keeping the riffraff out, the man's fingers flew across his phone screen. Tyra lingered outside for a moment, weighing her options. She could easily walk back in, flash her ID, and demand an apology. But where was the fun in that? No, she decided, this would be far more entertaining if she played the long game. She picked up her bag, gave the coffee shop one last glance, and strolled down the street, her mind already buzzing with ideas. Grits had no idea who he had just messed with, but he was about to find out. The video spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, the clip of Officer Grits manhandling Tyra was trending on every platform. The person who uploaded it, a local freelance journalist named Damian Watts, had added dramatic captions, *, "Racist cop kicks woman out of coffee shop, watch closely," * complete with zoom-ins, slow motion, and exaggerated sound effects. The video was tailor-made to grab attention. Twitter exploded. Hashtags like #CoffeeShopKaren and #JusticeForTyra began trending, though no one in the video had yet recognized her. The comments section was a chaotic battleground of outrage, sarcasm, and disbelief. "Imagine kicking someone out of a building they probably own," one user wrote, ironically close to the truth. "Bet she's suing. Someone get her a lawyer." Meanwhile, Grits had unwittingly become a meme. Screenshots of his sneer, paired with captions like, "When you realize you just ruined your career," and "Racism, now available in extra bold espresso," were plastered everywhere. TikTok creators reenacted the incident, layering in their own ridiculous voiceovers or pretending to be Tyra's lawyer, coming to her defense. Tyra, lounging in her penthouse with a glass of wine, scrolled through the chaos with a mix of amusement and curiosity. "They're creative," she said to herself, chuckling at one particularly absurd video that showed Grits being kicked out of the same coffee shop by an animated barista. Her assistant, Kara, stormed into the room, phone in hand. "Tyra, do you realize what's happening? This thing has over 10 million views. The media's calling it the coffee shop incident." Tyra shrugged. "I'm aware." Kara looked exasperated. You don't want to do anything about it? Issue a statement? Reveal who you are? This is a PR goldmine. I will, Tyra said, taking another sip of her wine. But not yet. Let them stew for a while. Timing is everything. Down at the precinct, Grits was just beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. His colleagues avoided eye contact as he walked through the station. He finally found his captain, who was watching the viral video on a computer screen, jaw clenched. This is ridiculous, Grits barked. They're blowing it out of proportion. She was causing a scene. The captain turned to him, eyes narrowed. What scene? All I see is you dragging someone out of a coffee shop like a damn fool. Do you know who that woman is? No, and I don't care. Grits snapped. Well, you should care, the captain shot back. Because whoever she is, she has the entire internet on her side. I've got reporters calling, activists demanding your badge, and half the city threatening boycotts. Grits opened his mouth to argue, but the captain cut him off. Save it. You're on desk duty until further notice. And pray to God this blows over, or you're done. Back at Tyra's penthouse, Kara was pacing. They're going to figure out it's you eventually, she said, her tone filled with equal parts concern and disbelief. What's your endgame? Tyra grinned. Oh, I have a plan. But first, let them keep talking. The longer this brews, the better the payoff. As the evening wore on, the buzz around the video only intensified. News outlets picked up the story, each offering their take on the incident. Some framed it as a clear case of racial discrimination. Others debated the broader implications of bias in policing. Tyra watched it all unfold, her grin widening. She wasn't just riding the wave, she was preparing to turn the tide. The next morning, the city woke up to headlines about the coffee shop incident, now plastered across every major news outlet. Analysts on morning shows debated the implications, with panelists weighing in on issues of racism, authority abuse, and public accountability. Tyra decided it was time to escalate. She picked up her phone and dialed Damien Watts, the journalist who had uploaded the viral video. His voice was cautious but curious when he answered. Ms. Owens, he said, recognizing her immediately. This is an unexpected call. I'm sure it is, Tyra replied smoothly. You stirred up quite the storm yesterday. I'd like to meet. Damien paused. Are you going to confirm the rumors? People are speculating that you're the woman in the video. I am, Tyra said simply. But that's not why I want to talk. Let's discuss this in person. Noon. My office. She hung up before he could respond, confident he wouldn't pass up the opportunity. By the time Damien arrived, he was visibly nervous but intrigued. Tyra's office was a sleek, sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. She greeted him with a firm handshake and gestured for him to sit. I'll cut to the chase, Tyra began. You've built a firestorm, and now everyone is watching. What I want to know is, how far are you willing to go? Damien frowned. I'm not sure what you mean. Tyra leaned forward, her eyes sharp. This isn't just about me or that cop. It's about systemic issues, bias, abuse of power, the way people in authority treat those they perceive as powerless. You've captured the spark. I want to turn it into a movement. Damien hesitated. You're talking about advocacy. Protests. Policy change. Exactly, Tyra said, her tone firm. And I'm willing to fund it. But it has to be more than just noise. We need a plan, and it starts with accountability. Damien nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. So, what's the first step? Tyra smiled. We make it impossible for them to ignore us. Meanwhile, Grits was unraveling. Every attempt to defend himself only made things worse. His comments to a local news outlet, insisting he had acted appropriately, were met with backlash. Social media erupted anew, with users dissecting every word he said and pointing out his history of complaints. By the end of the day, a protest had formed outside the coffee shop. Dozens of people gathered, holding signs that read, Justice for all. And asterisk. Accountability now. Asterisk local activists joined the cause, using the incident as a rallying point to demand police reform. Inside the precinct, the captain's patience had worn thin. He called Grits into his office, slamming a folder onto the desk. "You've got 3 choices," he said. "Apologize, resign, or prepare for a public inquiry that'll rip you apart." Grits was livid but cornered. He stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just facing public outrage. He was up against a force far bigger than himself. That evening, Tyra held a private meeting with her team, Damien, and a few trusted advisors. They laid out a strategy: organize a citywide forum on policing, invite diverse voices to the table, and use the momentum to push for tangible change. As the night wore on, Tyra's vision became clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't just about righting a personal wrong, it was about setting a precedent. Grits might have kicked her out of a coffee shop, but she was about to kick open a door that had been locked for far too long. The next week, Tyra's office buzzed with activity. Damien had published an exclusive interview with her, outlining her vision for reform and accountability. The piece was widely shared, sparking a national conversation. Tyra's name, once associated only with luxury and exclusivity, was now synonymous with activism and change. She had successfully shifted the narrative from the viral video to a discussion about power, responsibility, and the need for systemic reform. The media was relentless. Reporters were camped outside her building, cameras trained on her every move. But Tyra had learned how to navigate the public eye with ease. She didn't mind the attention, it was all part of the game. However, Grits was not handling the spotlight as gracefully. The pressure was mounting, both from the media and from within his department. His social media feed was flooded with insults and threats. A steady stream of news articles painted him as a villain, and he had become the face of everything that was wrong with policing in the city. He called his union representative, in desperation. "This is insane! How did it all get this far?" The union rep's voice on the other end was calm but firm. "You made a mistake. A big one. And now you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Don't act like you didn't know better." "But I didn't know who she was," Grits protested, though his defense was growing weaker by the day. "You didn't need to know," the rep replied. "You treated her like crap because she didn't fit the image you had in your head. And now look where we are." Grits slammed his fist against the table. "So what now? I resign? Do I grovel for forgiveness?" "Not exactly," the rep said. "But you'd better start thinking about your future, because the public won't let this go. And neither will your department." Across the city, Tyra was preparing for her next move. The forum she had envisioned was quickly taking shape, with community leaders, activists, and experts agreeing to participate. She was determined to turn this into a platform for real change. No more distractions, no more sensationalism. This was about reshaping the way the system viewed people, particularly those who had been marginalized or misunderstood. She had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. Tyra wanted a public apology from Grits, but she also wanted something bigger, a commitment to reform. The forum was her way of forcing the issue, making it clear that if the city wanted to move forward, they had to address the toxic culture within its police force. Her team worked tirelessly in the background, gathering data, drafting proposals, and setting up meetings with influential figures. Tyra was everywhere, hosting interviews, speaking at rallies, and meeting with city officials. Each appearance, each conversation, was a strategic step towards something larger than just one incident. One evening, Tyra sat with Damien over coffee, reviewing the details for the upcoming forum. Damien had been instrumental in helping her navigate the media frenzy, but Tyra could sense he was growing tired. "This is bigger than I thought," he admitted. "The media attention is insane. Do you really think we can make a difference?" Tyra smiled, her confidence unwavering. "I don't think. I know." Damien raised an eyebrow. "And what happens when it's all said and done? When the cameras are off, and people move on to the next viral moment? Tyra's expression grew serious. Then we'll have changed something. Maybe not everything, but something real. We'll start a shift. We'll force people to confront their own biases. Damien was quiet for a moment, taking in her words. Then he nodded. All right, I'm in. The day of the forum arrived, and the energy in the air was palpable. The venue was packed, with rows of chairs filled by community members, activists, and journalists. Tyra took the stage, flanked by a diverse panel of speakers who were ready to discuss everything from racial profiling to police accountability. As the panelists spoke, Tyra observed the crowd. There was a palpable tension, but also a sense of hope. The room was filled with people who were tired of the status quo, who wanted something more. It wasn't about blaming one person, it was about holding the system accountable for the harm it had caused. Grits, meanwhile, was holed up in his apartment, watching the live stream of the forum. His pride and defiance were beginning to crack under the weight of public opinion. For the first time, he saw himself as a symbol, not of justice, but of everything that needed to change. As the day wore on, the conversation shifted toward solutions. Tyra made sure to keep the focus on actionable change, how to rebuild trust between the community and law enforcement, how to implement training that emphasized empathy and understanding, and how to hold officers accountable without placing blame on the entire force. It was during the final segment of the forum that Tyra dropped the bombshell. She was going to personally fund a community project aimed at fostering diversity and inclusion in the city's schools. I believe in the power of education, Tyra said, her voice steady but powerful. I believe in creating opportunities for the next generation to grow up in a world where they're not judged by the color of their skin or the size of their bank account. The audience erupted in applause, and for the first time since the viral video, Tyra felt like she had made a real difference. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, press conferences, and community events. Tyra's initiative had gained momentum, and the city was beginning to shift. People who once dismissed her as just another billionaire were now listening. She had transformed the viral incident into a catalyst for change, rallying activists, community leaders, and even law enforcement officers to engage in meaningful dialogue about reform. At the same time, Grit's situation continued to deteriorate. Despite his attempts to go unnoticed, he was a constant subject of ridicule and anger. His name had become synonymous with everything that was wrong with policing, and there was no escape from the barrage of criticism. His union rep had arranged a series of meetings with high-ranking officials in an attempt to salvage his career, but the damage was already done. Grits was being quietly sidelined within the department, and the pressure was taking its toll on his mental health. As Tyra's advocacy work grew, so did her influence. She had become a symbol not just for black women, but for anyone who had ever been overlooked or mistreated by the system. Her calls for reform had begun to echo beyond the city, sparking conversations in other cities and even gaining attention from national news outlets. The hashtag Justice for Tyra was now a rallying cry for people demanding accountability and change in law enforcement. But Tyra knew the battle was far from over. She had set her sights on one final goal, forcing Grits to publicly apologize, not just for his actions but for his entire mindset. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions, not through the courts, but through a shift in his own beliefs. It was a bold move, but Tyra was determined. She called a private meeting with the mayor, the chief of police, and several key city council members. The goal was simple: pressure Grits into publicly admitting his wrongs and committing to reform. We can't let him off easy, Tyra said, her voice unwavering. He needs to understand that his actions represent a much bigger problem. And we need to make sure that people like him know they can't get away with it anymore. The mayor nodded slowly, but the chief of police looked less certain. I understand what you're trying to do, but putting this man on blast might cause more harm than good. We're already dealing with the fallout from this incident. Are we sure we want to escalate things? I'm not escalating, Tyra replied, her tone firm. I'm holding him accountable. He has to face the music, and the rest of the city needs to see that we're serious about change. It was a delicate balance, but Tyra knew it was the right move. She wasn't just trying to tear down one man, she was trying to set a precedent. A precedent that no one, no matter their position or power, was above accountability. Meanwhile, Grits was growing increasingly desperate. He had tried to ignore the media storm, but the constant barrage of messages and calls was taking its toll. He couldn't escape the fact that his career was likely over, and the humiliation was suffocating. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, he scrolled through social media, his eyes landing on a post from the very journalist who had exposed his actions. Damien had written a new piece titled, "The Fall of Officer Grits, a Lesson in Accountability." It was a scathing takedown, highlighting his history of misconduct and outlining the damage his actions had caused to his community. For the first time, Grits felt a deep sense of shame. His actions had been exposed not just as a single mistake, but as part of a larger pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. In the days that followed, Tyra's team released a statement outlining the next steps for the reform initiative. She called for greater community involvement, more rigorous training for police officers, and a broader conversation about racism and inequality in law enforcement. It was a comprehensive plan, and it garnered overwhelming support from the public. But the real turning point came when Grits, after weeks of silence, agreed to meet with Tyra. It was a tense encounter. Grits had agreed to publicly apologize and commit to working toward reform, but there was one condition: he wanted to meet with Tyra first, in private. Tyra wasn't sure what to expect, but she agreed. They met in a neutral location, a quiet cafe away from the prying eyes of the media. Grits arrived looking haggard, his once pristine uniform now disheveled. He sat down across from Tyra, his hands trembling slightly. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he began, his voice shaky. "And I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, and for the way I've treated others in the past." Tyra regarded him silently, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking for an apology. She was looking for something more. "I know words are cheap," Grits continued, his eyes downcast. "But I want to do better. I want to change. I don't want to be the person I was." Tyra leaned forward, her gaze intense. "It's not just about changing your words, Grits. It's about changing your mindset. It's about understanding that people, no matter their race, gender, or background, deserve respect. It's about understanding that your actions have consequences, not just for individuals but for entire communities. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fine. You have to work for it." Grits nodded, his eyes full of regret. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Tyra studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. Finally she spoke. "I believe you. But this isn't about me. It's about everyone you've hurt. And it's about showing them that you're serious about changing." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "If you're willing to do the work, then we can move forward. But this isn't just about making a public apology. It's about real transformation. And that takes time." Grits nodded again, the reality of what he was agreeing to settling in. Tyra had given him a chance to prove that he was more than his mistakes. But it was going to be an uphill battle. And the world would be watching. Tyra's work wasn't done yet. There were still battles to fight, reforms to push, and hearts to change. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. She had started something bigger than herself. And no matter how long it took, she was determined to see it through. Tyra's efforts had begun to ripple outward in ways she hadn't initially expected. The public dialogue had shifted from the outrage of a single incident to a larger conversation about institutionalized bias, the power of public accountability, and the work still needed to heal long-standing wounds. What started as a personal challenge had turned into a movement, one that was demanding change on every level. Her transformation from an anonymous billionaire to a voice for justice and accountability had been swift but strategic. Tyra's message resonated with people from all walks of life, not just because she was wealthy or powerful, but because she was unapologetically herself. She wasn't afraid to speak her truth, and her commitment to making things right wasn't based on optics but on genuine belief that things could be different. At the same time, Grits was finding the weight of his own transformation to be far heavier than he had anticipated. Every public apology, every meeting, every interaction with Tyra had forced him to confront his own biases. He had never thought of himself as a racist, never believed that he had done anything wrong beyond a lapse in judgment on that fateful day. But as the weeks went on, it became clear that his initial apology hadn't been enough. People wanted more than words, they wanted action. They wanted evidence that he had truly changed. His attempts to salvage his career seemed increasingly futile. Grits had attempted to distance himself from the viral meme, but that only made him seem more defensive. The internet didn't forget, and the news outlets weren't about to let him off easy. Despite the union's support, and the police department's attempt to shield him, Grits had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. His past actions, like his casual dismissal of Tyra, were being examined in the light of systemic issues within law enforcement. The focus was no longer on the individual mistake, but on the larger, more insidious patterns of behavior that enabled such mistakes to happen in the first place. The media's portrayal of Grits was unforgiving. His every move was scrutinized, with people dissecting his statements, analyzing his body language, and debating whether his apology was sincere. For a while, it seemed as though there was no way out for him. Tyra, on the other hand, was making strides in areas that even she had not anticipated. She had begun speaking directly with community leaders, working closely with grassroots organizations that focused on education, criminal justice reform, and police accountability. She had leveraged her platform not just to advocate for change, but to build a coalition of voices that would not back down until things were different. Tyra knew that the road ahead was not going to be easy. She could see that the system, at least in its current form, wasn't ready to fully embrace the kind of change she envisioned. But the growing sense of solidarity among citizens, black, white, and every shade in between, gave her hope. She knew that change wasn't going to come in a singular moment. It was going to take time, persistence, and unwavering commitment. Grits, however, seemed to have lost his sense of purpose. As much as he tried to rehabilitate his image, he couldn't escape the realization that he had no true allies within the department. His peers seemed disinterested in helping him, and his reputation among the public had plummeted. People weren't just angry at him. They were disillusioned by the entire system that had allowed his behavior to go unchecked for so long. The more he tried to defend himself, the more people saw him as part of the problem rather than a figure who could help fix it. It was a hard truth to swallow for someone who had spent his life working in law enforcement, someone who had always believed in the righteousness of his position. But the more Grits reflected on it, the more he realized that the department had never truly prepared him for the kind of transformation that was now required. His training, his peers, and the system itself had failed him. And now, it seemed like his only option was to make a very public, very difficult decision, to completely overhaul the way he saw the world, or to step away entirely. Tyra had watched this transformation from the sidelines, observing Grits' decline with a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. She didn't want to see him completely break down, but she also knew that he was a product of a larger issue. She had to admit that while his apology was a start, it wasn't enough to heal the wounds he had caused. The system had allowed him to continue without truly addressing the root of his actions. But Tyra wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. She knew that accountability wasn't just about holding individuals responsible. It was about creating lasting change that would ensure nothing like this would ever happen again. Tyra's approach had always been one of resilience. She didn't back down when things got tough, and she didn't wait for others to act before she made her move. In the coming weeks, she would continue to push for changes that extended beyond Grits' case. She would hold her community accountable, just as she had demanded the police department do the same. Her ultimate goal was to shift the cultural mindset that allowed discrimination, prejudice, and bias to thrive unnoticed, to ensure that the next generation would grow up in a world where equality was a reality, not just a concept. At the same time, Grits began to realize that his path forward wouldn't be dictated by the media or the opinions of others. It would be determined by his own willingness to learn and grow. His first step was acknowledging that he didn't have all the answers, that his perspective had been shaped by years of institutional biases that he had never questioned. He began attending sensitivity and diversity training sessions, though he still struggled with the uncomfortable truths that came with them. But Tyra had made one thing clear: true change required more than just doing the bare minimum. It required a commitment to understanding, to empathy, and to humility. As the months passed, Tyra continued to push for reforms, holding meetings with city officials, engaging with the public, and using her platform to keep the conversation alive. She was unrelenting, determined to turn her personal experience into a nationwide movement. She was more than just a symbol, she was a force for change. Her work was far from over, but Tyra knew one thing for certain: the world was watching, and she wasn't going to let up until real change took place. Grits, meanwhile, continued his journey of self-exploration. It wasn't easy, and there were days when he questioned whether he could ever redeem himself. But slowly, he began to understand the depth of his mistake, and the bigger responsibility he had to help reshape a broken system. He knew his path would be a long one, but he was finally ready to walk it. And as the months passed, Grits, like the city, began to change. Tyra's work was becoming more than just a battle for accountability. It was evolving into a crusade for systemic reform. Every step she took, from speaking with community leaders to organizing marches, was a deliberate push toward a shift in cultural consciousness. The response to her efforts had been overwhelming, a testament to the power of collective action. The narrative of a wealthy, powerful black woman confronting a racist cop had captured the attention of the public in a way that few stories ever had. It wasn't just a personal battle anymore, it was a national call to action. As Tyra's influence grew, so did her understanding of the complexity of the work ahead. She had initially thought that her wealth and platform would be enough to create change, but she quickly realized that true transformation required more than just visibility. It required sustained, collaborative efforts that reached deep into the roots of society. She had already made her mark in the media and had forced people to confront uncomfortable truths, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The first few months after the incident had been a whirlwind. Tyra had stayed in the public eye, using her voice to advocate for marginalized communities, fight against discrimination, and demand police reform. She had received messages of support from every corner of the globe. But she also faced a considerable amount of backlash. Critics accused her of using her wealth and status for self-promotion, of capitalizing on the incident for personal gain. Yet Tyra remained unfazed. She knew that her efforts were about something much larger than her, something that went beyond her own personal agenda. The backlash, however, wasn't just from critics. It was also coming from within her own circles. There were those who had initially supported her cause who were now urging her to back down, to soften her approach, to make peace with the establishment. They suggested that she take a less combative route, focus on charity work, and leave the difficult conversations to others. Tyra, however, was resolute. She understood that the conversations she was starting were exactly the ones that needed to be had. If she backed down now, she would be compromising everything she had worked for. Her resolve was tested further when Grits, the officer responsible for the viral incident, reached out to her again. After months of silence, he had taken steps toward redemption, attending multiple workshops on diversity, racism, and implicit bias. He had even begun to work directly with the community, though his efforts were met with skepticism. People didn't want to see him as a reformed figure, they saw him as a reminder of everything that was wrong with the system. But Grits was insistent. He understood that his path to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he was committed to doing the work. Tyra's initial reaction was one of skepticism. She had no interest in playing the role of the forgiving black woman who simply accepted an apology and moved on. She had seen too many cases where apologies were given, but no real action followed. She had no intention of letting Grits off the hook without proof of genuine change. But something in his message resonated with her, a willingness to learn, to grow, and to take responsibility for his actions. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Tyra arranged a meeting with him, unsure of what to expect. She knew that the road ahead for both of them would be fraught with challenges, but she wasn't one to shy away from tough conversations. As they sat down together, Grits spoke openly about his past, acknowledging the systemic racism that had shaped his worldview. He admitted that he had never questioned the authority of the police force or the way things had always been done. But he also made it clear that he wasn't looking for forgiveness, he was looking for a way to make amends, to be part of the solution. Tyra listened carefully, her thoughts a mixture of doubt and curiosity. She could see the sincerity in his words, but she wasn't ready to forgive him. Instead, she challenged him. She asked him what he was doing to hold his colleagues accountable, what changes he was advocating for within the department. She made it clear that he would need to do more than attend workshops. He would need to lead by example and be a vocal advocate for the kind of reform she was fighting for. The conversation was uncomfortable, raw, and honest. But it was also necessary. Tyra's stance was clear. She wasn't interested in empty gestures. She wanted to see real change, not just from Grits but from the system as a whole. For Grits, the meeting was a turning point. He realized that his journey toward redemption wasn't just about repairing his relationship with Tyra. It was about confronting the systems of power that had enabled his behavior. He couldn't simply apologize and move on. He had to take active steps to dismantle the structures that perpetuated injustice. Tyra, in turn, recognized that her role in this process wasn't just to hold others accountable. It was to create space for growth, for transformation. She had the power to inspire change, but she also had the responsibility to help guide others on their own journeys toward redemption. She didn't have all the answers, but she was willing to be a part of the solution. Her journey had taken unexpected turns, but she was more determined than ever to see it through. In the following weeks, Tyra's message continued to resonate across the nation. She partnered with organizations focused on police reform, worked with activists advocating for racial justice, and used her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been marginalized. Her work was changing the narrative, one conversation at a time. But she knew that this battle would take more than just words. It would take action, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to the cause. Grits, meanwhile, was putting in the work. He was facing criticism from his peers and members of the public who felt that his transformation was too little, too late. But he wasn't deterred. He had learned that true change required facing the uncomfortable truths, making difficult decisions, and standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't popular. As he continued his work, he found himself questioning the very systems he had once upheld without question. The more he learned, the more he realized that the police force, and society at large, needed a complete overhaul if true justice was to be achieved. Tyra and Grits were on separate journeys, but their paths were becoming increasingly intertwined. They had both been forced to confront their own biases, their own roles in a flawed system. And though their paths to redemption looked different, they were both working toward the same goal, a world where true equality, justice, and fairness were no longer ideals but realities. The road ahead was long, but Tyra was more committed than ever to seeing it through. Tyra's plan to transform the police precinct into a luxury spa had, in many ways, become her symbolic move to rewrite the narrative. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Officer Grits or exposing the police force's flaws. It was about showing the world that healing, transformation, and redemption could take on an entirely new form. The idea of turning a place of oppression into a space for relaxation and growth felt like the ultimate irony. But to Tyra, it felt like the most fitting way to demonstrate the true power of resilience and transformation. As she laid out her plans, the public's reaction was mixed. Some praised her for her creativity and boldness, while others found the idea unsettling. For those who had followed her journey, though, it was clear that she was doing something bigger than just pranking a cop. She was challenging the systems that upheld discrimination and prejudice, turning them on their head with humor and audacity. The project was meant to serve as a reminder that the real work wasn't about vengeance. It was about challenging people to think differently, to see the world through a different lens. Tyra wasn't naive. She knew that transforming the precinct would be no simple task. It required a delicate balance of diplomacy, negotiation, and public relations. But Tyra's vision was clear. She wasn't just fighting for equality. She was fighting to redefine what that looked like in a society where old ideas were no longer sufficient. Her plan was not merely symbolic. It was an attempt to push the boundaries of what could be achieved when empathy, forgiveness, and accountability collided. Behind the scenes, Tyra began working with urban developers, designers, and architects to figure out how they could turn the oppressive, militaristic atmosphere of the precinct into a sanctuary of peace. The walls that had once seen brutality would now host art installations that reflected the diversity and strength of the community. The cold, sterile holding cells would be replaced with therapeutic spaces, and the entire building would be transformed into a retreat, a space where officers and the community could come together, relax, and engage in real conversations. The project was bold, but it was also a necessary disruption. Tyra wasn't asking for a simple apology or for Grits to be punished. What she wanted was a space for reconciliation, a chance for healing where the wounds of the past could finally begin to close. She understood that the process wouldn't be easy. It would involve resistance from those who didn't understand the need for change, from those who saw the precinct as an institution that should remain untouchable. But for Tyra, the idea of a luxury spa in the heart of the system that had once tried to crush her was the perfect way to break the cycle of hate and start something new. Throughout the process, Tyra worked closely with social justice activists, influencers, and thought leaders to rally support for the project. They helped to frame the narrative of what the transformation could represent, not just for the police force, but for the entire community. It was an opportunity to create something positive in the face of adversity. The spa wasn't a retreat from the world. It was a space where the hard conversations could finally happen, where systemic issues could be addressed in a way that wasn't driven by anger or violence, but by understanding and collaboration. The media caught wind of the project, and soon Tyra found herself at the center of a new wave of attention. The transformation of the precinct became the talk of the town, with news outlets covering every aspect of the project. Tyra's critics were still vocal, accusing her of being too lenient on the system that had wronged her. But Tyra knew that this project was more than just about her. It was about the future of communities everywhere. If she could transform one small corner of the system, perhaps others would be inspired to follow suit. Perhaps this idea could ripple out and inspire others to rethink how they dealt with pain, trauma, and injustice. The final design of the spa was nothing short of luxurious, yet it was grounded in inclusivity and accessibility. It wasn't just for the elite, it was for everyone. There were spaces for community meetings, art workshops, and healing circles, all designed to foster collaboration, understanding, and empathy. The spa wasn't meant to be a retreat from reality. It was meant to be a reminder that real change happened when people were willing to face their discomfort, their biases, and their differences. It was a place where healing wasn't just about relaxation. It was about confronting the hard truths and learning to move forward. As the opening day of the new precinct spa approached, Tyra found herself reflecting on how far she had come. What had started as a simple prank, a way to expose the injustices she faced, had become a movement, a transformation of not just a physical space, but a cultural mindset. Her journey had been one of growth, resilience, and ultimately forgiveness, not because she had forgotten the pain she had endured, but because she had chosen to rise above it, to create something better out of it. The day the precinct-turned-spa opened was nothing short of a spectacle. Tyra stood at the entrance, surrounded by community leaders, activists, and press, knowing that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. She had shown the world that healing wasn't just about punishing those who had done wrong. It was about creating a space where people could come together, learn from their mistakes, and work toward building a future where everyone had a seat at the table. Her transformation was far from over. She knew that the battle for equality, for justice, and for true inclusion would continue. But she had proven that change was possible, that it could happen in the most unexpected ways. The precinct-turned-spa became a symbol not just of what had been achieved, but of what was still possible. A symbol of redemption, growth, and the power of empathy to shape a more inclusive future. Tyra's legacy wasn't just in the transformation of the precinct, it was in the cultural shift she had inspired. A shift that demanded accountability, that asked for forgiveness but also for meaningful action. Her story had become a blueprint for others to follow, showing that real change could happen when people had the courage to imagine a world that was different from the one they knew. The journey had been long, but in the end, Tyra had achieved something greater than revenge. She had achieved transformation, not just of a building, but of hearts and minds. And that, she knew, was the kind of legacy that would endure for generations to come.